If you're new to my channel, hi, this is me. For the past 5 years, I've been documenting my fitness journey here on YouTube. My burning desire to become a bigger and stronger version of myself led me to resistance training with a strength bias at the start, but later on I narrowed in my focus on hypertrophy training. Despite getting some progress along the way, gaining roughly 25 pounds of mass and finally look like I kind of lift, my arms are still lagging. It's time to change that. So, about 6 months ago, I started prioritizing arm training, and after an initial trial and error phase, I finally dialed in on the parameters that are going to work best for me. I'm going to share all this in today's episode to show you what it actually takes to grow bigger arms as an intermediate lifter with average arm genetics. Without further ado, let's take a look at my strategy for 2023. The goal is very simple. I want to grow bigger arms, preferably by an inch at least. For that, I'm going to target 4 muscle groups in the process. For the upper section of the arms, I'll be focusing on the triceps and the biceps. For the lower section, the goal is to develop the brachioradialis in combination with both the flexors and extensors of the forearm. Once I've defined my goal with quantifiable measurements, now I need to identify my reality as a lifter. I call myself an intermediate trainee based on a few reasons. The first one is that I have over 5 years of resistance training experience under my belt, and I've reached the commonly accepted strength standards of a 2-plate bench, a 3-plate squat, and a 4-plate deadlift. The second one is that in the process of getting stronger, I have added roughly 25 pounds of mass to my frame, which means that my newbie gains are pretty much tapped out at this point in time. And thirdly, my mind is in the right place. I have fully embraced the reality that I can no longer progress linearly. Thus, gains have slowed down significantly. Plus, I have to expand my pull-off exercises in order to avoid overuse injury, and now I have to be a little bit more mindful of the so-called stimulus to fatigue ratio whenever I program big barbell compound lifts. The reason why I'm explaining all this is because if you're still a beginner based on the definition I just gave you, you have literally no business in copying this strategy I'm going to be using in 2023 for bigger arms. It'll be too much for you and you won't be able to sustain it in the long run. Lastly, let me unpack the end part of my description, the bit where I said average genetics. Look, I usually ignore when newbies blame genetics for the lack of gains. But when you are more on an intermediate stage, you kind of know where your strengths and weaknesses lie. You've been around the block, so to speak. So when genetic outliers tell you things like this,
I'm a 20-year-old natural calisthenics athlete, and this is what I look like 24/7. My upper body is only built by 2 compound movements, weighted pull-ups and weighted dips. The main focus, if your goal is looking good and gaining muscles, is choosing compound movements. It's not doing isolated exercises, it's doing compound lifts.
It kind of pisses me off, but to be fair, they're just sharing their own reality. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of us, their only compound approach is going to prevent us from growing our arms more optimally, if any at all. You can either listen to them and then learn the hard reality 2 to 3 years deep into your own training journey, or you can accept the fact that you, like most people, require isolation work in your program. I do need isolation lifts for my arms, like most people do, and that would make my arm genetics average. My training split is as simple as it gets. 5 days of training, 2 days of rest. Upper A, lower A, rest. Arm, lower B, upper B, rest. There is nothing inherently superior about this training split. This is only a way for me to structure the volume per body part trained in a whole week. Over the years, I've learned that training a specific body part at the start of the session is much better than at the end. You've got more energy, more focus, you're less fatigued, and thus you are more likely to push it for real. So, I want to devote a whole training session to overload those areas I would like to prioritize. It is high time for isolation lifts to reach actual parity with compound lifts on certain sessions. The latter are a priority most times, but at least once a week I need to flip the script. All of the muscle groups in my arm prioritization phase will be targeted at least 2 times per week. The triceps being the only exception, although this is likely to change later on because I might up the training frequency for the biceps brachii as well. On upper body days, the muscles of my arms will be targeted during compound lifts to a lesser extent, and I will finish off those 2 sessions with isolation work in a superset fashion. But the bulk of the weekly volume for my arms is to be completed on the specific arm day in the middle of the week. The exercises that I'm going to be using from now on have passed the quote-unquote trial and error phase I previously mentioned. After a few months experimenting with certain lifts, it's time to draft the ones that I feel I'm getting the most out of. Based on the primary muscle movers they target, these are, for the triceps, the standing overhead tricep extensions with a rope, bar pushdowns with a cable, and skull crushers with dumbbells. For biceps, the seated preacher curls with an easy bar and the Bayesian curl with a cable. For the outer part of the forearms, the brachioradialis, standing reverse curls with an easy bar, and spider curls with dumbbells. And for the inner part of the forearms, I'll be using the barbell finger plus wrist curls and the wrist extension with an easy bar. Even though I've listed a total of 9 different lifts, please notice that I have placed 3 of them on a higher priority level. Roughly 2/3 of my total arm training will come from these 3. They're gonna give me the biggest bang for my buck, and the remaining lifts are planned as a way to round things out, avoid overuse injuries, as well as to fill any potential holes. So, even within isolation exercises, as you can tell, an intermediate lifter has to make a call on which lifts are top tier and spend most of his time and energy on those. There's nothing groundbreaking as far as intensity is concerned, so I'm going to openly borrow what seems to have worked the best across multiple generations of bodybuilders as well as hypertrophy enthusiasts. Exceptions aside, I'll stick to the 8 to 12 rep range for the most part, which translates into a load that is 70 to 80% of my 1 rep max in a given lift. I could be a little bit more flexible sometimes, but I plan on sticking to this range for the big 3 I mentioned before throughout 2023. My starting point will be 34 sets divided across the 4 separate areas I've previously discussed. Almost half the volume will be directed to the triceps, which is the most resilient muscle group and thus the one that can tolerate the biggest workload. Half of those will be biased to the long head, which is the largest muscle of the triceps and, from an aesthetics perspective, the most important muscle in enhancing the sweeping chunk underneath the arm when flexing. The biceps brachii will incur 7 total sets of punishment, as well as the brachioradialis. The remaining 6 sets will target the smaller muscles in the inner part of the forearm, primarily responsible for the extension and flexion of the wrists. Elbow flexion and extension will be involved in 28 out of the 34 sets, which is a high demand for this particular joint. And this is the reason why I decided to add a fair bit of variation for my arm training in order to avoid connective tissue tear from happening in the same spots over and over and over again. Out of all the variables in my training, volume is probably the one that I need to be the most careful about due to a past overuse injury I had in my right elbow a few years ago. By the way, if you're going through something similar and you're curious to learn how I overcame golfer's elbow in the past, I would highly recommend for you to check out this video later on. All the theoretical framework I've presented to you so far will amount to nothing if you don't know how to push your sets. And here I have to come back to the beginning of this video when I said that I consider myself an intermediate lifter and that I do know how to gauge muscular failure and reps in reserve. The 2 most popular destinations I'll be shooting for the vast majority of my arm sets will be either 0 reps in reserve or muscular concentric failure. More advanced muscle building techniques will be deployed occasionally, but these will be used as a way to finish off a specific movement and not a default method to complete every single set. Additionally, I think it's important to point out that I will be using these advanced methods only for the triceps. For example, in the last set of overhead rope extensions, I'll be using partials to keep punishing the most lengthened position of the muscle. I will also be implementing a drop set in the last set of bar pushdowns. And on a separate day, I'll be going beyond concentric failure on the last set of skull crushers to the point where I can no longer fully control the descent of the dumbbells. In sum, out of the 14 sets for triceps, only 3 of them will involve a high-effort technique to completely exhaust the muscle being worked. I might end up adding a raspa set for cable curls on a lower body day if I want to complete a quick extra set for the biceps and thus hit this muscle group 3 times per week. This possibility is on the table, but I haven't yet made up my mind on it. Finally, I'll be using a repetition system that will auto-regulate the load. For example, across 3 sets of an exercise, the load has to be such that I have to be physically able to complete at the very least 25 reps in total. The number in the opening sets not being lower than 10. An example of this rule would be to perform 11 to 10 reps in the first set, 10 to 9 in the second, and 9 to 8 in the last one. Regardless of the initial number you start with, the goal would always be to add 5 reps across the 3 sets. In actual numbers, this means that there has to be an increase in performance where 2 additional reps are completed in the first 2 sets and only 1 additional rep must be done in the closing one. Once this rep scheme criterion is met, then and only then I'll reward myself by adding extra weight to the movement. And from then on, the new goal will be to repeat the whole process all over again. Alright, I really hope this video has given you an understanding of what goes into hypertrophy training beyond the beginner phase. The days where you just go to the gym and wing it with sheer effort are gone for me, and so they will for you sooner rather than later. Therefore, it is up to you to come up with a personalized plan of attack to keep moving forward. I really hope that you learned some interesting concepts and principles that you could then apply to your own training in order to achieve whatever hypertrophy training goals you are after. If you enjoyed today's video, check out this other one. I think you're gonna like it. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell to get notified every time a new video goes live. Stay fit, stay strong, help me raise an army of Super Saiyans all around the world. Peace.